Well, hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about what to wear whenever you're doing some form of a presentation in front of an audience. So, here's a few thoughts and a few ideas. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is how to define what kind of look works best for you. And we're going to take the advice from Kelly Stotzel. And now, Kelly Stotzel is the content director at TED, and she also has a good sense of not of fashion, but a good style when it comes to the best things that you can work with when doing a presentation. Now, the first piece of advice that she gives us is that you shouldn't really stress about it too much, and try to solve it as early as possible. Try to put it on the to-do list, but to solve way before you actually focus on what's important, which is your message and the content of the information that you're providing. So don't stress too much about this, and try to focus on it, but give it enough time, but not too much time that takes a lot of energy out of you. So start that as early as possible. Now, the first piece of advice that she provides is to wear something that you feel good in, or rather, great in. There's many things or many stereotypes that we fall into whenever we think about the way that we need to look in front of an audience. But really, the first thing you need to answer and to define rather is to wear something that you feel great in. The other thing you need to think about is what you're going to make the audience feel whenever you're in front of them. Now, if you look too serious, everybody's going to think that, in fact, the talk is going to be excessively serious. If you look too loose, of course, you might even look unprofessional, depending on how the audience is going to picture you. So remember that the way that what you put on and the way that you wear is the first image, and what people are going to be looking at. Now, if for any reason your topic is not as strong, which we hope is not the case, then people will start focusing on what you're wearing. And we're going to give a few examples of people that were not wearing the most fancy piece of clothing or articles of clothing, and their talk went incredibly good. But then again, their content was pretty strong. So another thing is that it is important to wear something that you like, and you can project relaxed confidence, that you look confidence, and which is something that also you can project, and people can actually feel how confident you are. Now, if you wear something that makes you feel uncomfortable, people are also going to notice, and it's going to affect the way you present the message. So be careful with that. Now, here's a couple of questions that you should answer before you decide your outfit. Now, the first thing is there a dress code to the event that you're going? Is there a specific attire that you are required to take or to wear? Like in this case, I put a picture of two men, which they're obviously going to a wedding. Now, usually for weddings, I put this example because there's a specific dress code. You wouldn't be wearing something that doesn't match the type of event. In this case, whenever you're presenting something, there is an event you are attending. So therefore, you need to figure out what the dress code is. So figure that out. Figure that out. That's going to help you narrow down the type of attire that you need to be wearing. The other thing is, how is the audience going to be dressed? Okay? You need to look similar to them, but go a step further. Look a bit smarter than they do. You need to have some way of standing out, but always remember what your audience is. And we've tackled this topic or this issue in the past, in which you need to dress for the part, and you need to know what your audience is going to be like. In this case, how they're going to dress, and what they're going to look like. Now, the other question you need to ask is if you're going to be filmed. Okay, if you're going to be filmed, this piece of advice is important. Don't avoid bright white, because you're going to be like a piece of light focusing on the camera, and you probably don't want that. The other thing is that don't use jet black, something that is completely black, because usually whenever you're on a stage, the background of a lot of stages is completely dark, so you don't want to look like a floating head on the stage. And don't wear small patterns, because if you wear small patterns, what's going to have is that it's going to create this funny dancing effect on the camera. Like if you have small lines, or if you have small little dots or little squares or things like that, you don't want that to show on camera, because it's gonna distract the audience that's not on stage. That's not excuse me, that's not in the theater or where you're presenting. It's going to distract the audience that are watching you through a screen. So don't do that. Avoid any kind of small patterns. Now, the other thing is that you need to find out what kind of microphone you're using. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because for many of these talks, especially in a style of a TED talk, people tend to wear a microphone that goes over the ear. Now, if it goes over your ear, you might not want to be wearing, especially the ladies, which is where this usually happens. Don't choose any kind of earrings that are going to hang, because that's going to create noise on the microphone, and you don't want that noise to be amplified over the speakers. And the other thing is that if you're moving, and if you're a guy who has a big beard, if you move your mouth and your face and your beard is also moving, that's also going to create a scratching noise on the microphone, and you don't want that to happen. So make sure to find out and dress the part, either shave or request a different type of mic. So you need to think of this in advance, because these are the kind of things that we don't usually think of, and they end up being a problem during our presentation. So also be careful with that. Another thing is that don't use accessories that are going to jangle and going to be that are going to be swinging around, because that's also going to be either a distraction or they're going to create noise that you don't want. Also, don't wear any kind of flashy jewelry, because that, of course, is going to be the lighting that you're going to have is going to be on you, and that's going to be a major reflection, and there's going to be a bunch of flashes floating around, and you don't want that. A good option that is also recommended is that you could use a light scarf that creates a contrast in the color. That's also a good idea, and if you can check out a lot of speakers who wear this, it tends to look pretty good. The other thing is that you need to figure out what the stage is going to look like. Okay, you need to, and why is this important? Well, as I mentioned before, if it's a dark stage, you might want to have a decent color that helps you stand out. There was a case of a talker, Linda Clayette Wayman. She was wearing a beautiful pink dress, and of course, this allowed her to stand out. She looked classy, she looked elegant, and the audience loved the audience loves these type of colors, and of course, so does the camera. The camera picks you up pretty well. If you're going to wear specific types of clothes, use fitted clothes that are your size. Don't use anything that's too loose or too baggy. A good silhouette always looks good. And make sure that you have the right size of clothing. If you have a size that doesn't fit you, is either too small, it's going to look strange, you're going to look constrained. And if you wear something that's too baggy, you might look out of place and unprofessional. So don't do that. Okay, that's pretty important. Now, if you don't know what to wear, maybe you should have a shopping date with somebody that you trust. Because another thing is that the way that you look at yourself, I've also mentioned this in the past, the way you look at yourself, the way that you see yourself in the mirror is usually not the way that people see you. People have a very different perception to the way you look at yourself. So having a second opinion is also incredibly valuable. Okay, now a word to the wise also, this is a very difficult thing, is to find a middle ground. Don't fall into the stereotypes, like the perfect suit, that makes you look like a boring lawyer. Nothing against lawyers, but a lot of them are the stereotype of people who don't look, too interesting. If there's any lawyers out there, I apologize, but try not to go there. And the other one is don't go too crazy. Don't go too crazy in your clothing. Don't look like you're in a 1980s video with these vibrant colors that make you look out of place, unless that's part of your topic and the objective that you're trying to reach. Okay, so take that into consideration. Find a middle ground. Something that also makes you look pretty professional is make sure that your clothes are properly pressed. Grab an iron and work on them and have them look as professional. If they're wrinkled, it shows that you didn't try hard enough, and it's going to make you look pretty unprofessional. Also, be careful to use irons if you're presenting something and you came out of a hotel and you use the iron at the hotel. Sometimes they're not the best appliance to use because they're not calibrated to what you're used to. So be careful when you iron clothes on with an iron that you are unfamiliar with. And if you're doing a talk that is pretty late in the evening, late in the afternoon, then you might want to bring your clothes on a hanger and have them separated from you properly pressed, and so they don't suffer any damage, any wrinkles. So take that into consideration. Also, it is important that the clothes that you select boost your confidence. It's also something that's pretty important because if you feel good, you look good, and then you have something less to worry about. It's not something that's on your mind. Now, here are a couple of crazy examples of people who were wearing something that was completely out of place or that wasn't what they should have worn, and yet things came out pretty well. Now, there's a Professor Barry Schwartz. He spoke about the paradox of choice, which is pretty interesting considering the type of clothing that he was using during his TED Talk. He was wearing a T-shirt, this pink T-shirt, and he was wearing shorts because it was a warm day. And this was a TED Talk. His talk was pretty interesting. He reached 7 million views. One of the things he said is that if he had known, he didn't know that there was going to be such a big audience. He didn't know that he was going to be filmed. He didn't care, and he did a marvelous talk. Now, this was a strange thing of something that came out pretty well. And the other example that I have is of Amanda Palmer. Now, she was talking about breaking the rules, and she had this approach. She was wearing a gray T-shirt, as you can see here, that she started sweating through her presentation, so her armpits started to turn black. And she said that she would have worn something different. And yet this worked in her favor because the audience thought that it was part of her approach. And this was also a massive hit. It's almost at 6 million views as well. So these are two cases from people that were wearing something completely different. And there's a lot of examples like this on the TED Talks, if you can check it out, of people wearing like blue jeans or wearing something that might not look as professional as you think, and yet it works for the topic that they're presenting. So remember that another thing that is not mentioned here on the slides, but I'd like to point out, is that another thing that is going to dictate what kind of clothing you need to wear is the topic that you are presenting. If you're talking about maybe, I don't know, skateboarding, which one of my students was talking about the importance of skateboarding in his life, you can look like a skateboarder. Why not? You know, as long as you're dressing for the part, and as long as it's part of your presentation, then go for it, by all means. So thank you very much. If you have any comments or any questions, make sure to drop me a message here on the video or send me an email. Thank you very much.